This video is sponsored by me. That's right. The weekend retreat is happening again this year from the 11th to the 13th of July. And you don't want to miss it because this year we're studying Ecclesiastes. That's right. The book that I haven't been able to stop talking about or thinking about for the last 5 years. We're putting aside a whole weekend to look at it. So email lambda.retreats@gmail.com if you're interested. It's from the 11th to the 13th of July. Whether you're a deeply committed Christian and you have been for years and you want a based environment to have those honest conversations, or maybe you're an atheist, but there's been some part of you been saying, I should give God a chance, or perhaps you're just feeling lonely and isolated in the modern world. Either way, email lambda.retreats@gmail.com and come and join us. Well, I've invited some of the sharpest minds of the internet to compete in a competition.
And then there's me.
No. And first amongst equals, Paul Vander, Klay. Welcome. I'm throwing down the gauntlet. Do you accept the challenge?
I guess so.
Not that you know what you're doing yet.
I have no idea, but we'll have fun. I'm sure of it.
Well, the idea is that you are this knight character and you're setting out on an adventure around the island.
Oh my.
That's a bit far out. As you travel, you will face various foes and you will do battle in the form of sort of discussions on various topics.
Ooh.
And the further you travel, the more gold you acquire in your pouch. And then you have to return back to Lambda's Landing to get it in your treasury. So the further out you go, the more lucrative it becomes. Okay. But you risk losing everything. So there's a bit of a push your luck mechanic in here. But mostly it's just a fun framing device around interesting conversations. I just like to spice it up a little bit.
All right. Well, I'm intrigued already, so this looks cool.
Good. All right. So the first decision you have to make is which way to go. So you've got, let's see, you could go to the Dunes of Dishonesty, and that'll be for questions around culture. You could go to the Biased Bridge for questions about society. You could go to the East Crossroads for questions about knowledge, or you could journey to the Standing Stones to talk about ethics.
Oh, let's go straight for dishonesty. Let's do that.
Awesome. You'll probably get the chance to come back to Lambda's Landing at some point and go a different route. So that this is not the rest of your session going towards culture, but subsequent questions down this route are digging further into culture, if you see what I mean.
Okay.
Good. So you're traveling along that road when, shock and horror, what should happen but a moon howler jumps out in your path.
Wow.
Growls rumble from the hulking silhouette. The werewolf advances, half man and half beast, with claws that gleam like daggers in the dim light.
Come back to school. A long time ago, we had the first books, but go on, please.
Really? Oh.
Yes.
So your question related to culture is cultural appropriation harmful or is it inevitable? So give me your thoughts on this topic. I'll score you by various metrics as we go, and then you will do battle, and there'll be some dice rolling, and you'll see if you defeated the monster.
I think cultural appropriation is, by definition, human and cultural. It's exactly what we do. We discover things, and we take them, or we push against them. One might argue that cultural appropriation always goes both ways. If you're resisting cultural appropriation, you're actually participating in it. I think it's inevitable.
And should we be completely positive about soaking in as much of the culture around us as we can, or should we also try to form our own identity as these are, for example, is there a positive aspect to finding the culture of your parents, of your place, of your people?
Oh, I think so. It's none of us were born with pants on. At some point, I think it was the Turks created the crotch and yet, you know, I don't find people anxious about cultural appropriation somehow avoiding the crotch. So it is just a completely human thing. Now, cultural appropriation is not random or haphazard. It is shaped by values. It is shaped by desire. It is shaped by our status hierarchies and competitions, and
Mhm.
we're tremendously subtle with it. But
Mm.
it's almost imagining a resistance to cultural approach. We do, again, we have to shape what we appropriate. But one of the things that I've seen throughout my life is that even so-called conservatives who are in some ways attempting to resist certain aspects of appropriation always absorb and appropriate other aspects that they think are irrelevant or beneficial. In other words, I don't really think there's any going back. And it's for that
Mm.
reason that even though some might look at my stack of beliefs and say, well, he's a conservative because he believes all of these traditional or historical things. I'm deeply skeptical as to whether or not conservatism is in any way possible, because
Mm.
one way or another, we are going to appropriate almost anything that we see as handy, desirable, or will get us to wherever it is we want to go.
Mm.
Good, bad, right, or wrong.
Could it be less of a binary? So there'd be an attitude of eagerly change everything as soon as possible, and you might say that's too much. That
Oh
there's a
yeah,
respect, a sort of reverence to keeping things a slight Chestertonian fence attitude of we don't know why our parents did things this way. It doesn't quite make sense to us, but we sort of lean towards keeping things that were passed down.
people tend towards, depending on obviously a lot of aspects about their temperament and their upbringing, they might shoot away from home only to find themselves back there one way or another, appreciating the wisdom of their parents' ways. They might
Mm,
stay within the track of their parents' ways and get to a point where they realize that there were trade-offs and obligations in that way that they are no longer willing to accept, and so they depart from that route. In the course of a life, we you'll see all of those things, but
mm,
I'm going to employ a little bit of Vervaekian cognitive science, and one of the key concepts I got from him, which is combinatorial explosiveness. There are always way more aspects and facets of human life than we can consciously um, even track, much
mm,
less attempt to manage or control. And
mm,
so that's part of the reason you can never step into the same river twice. There's just way too much going on, and at any given moment, our collective discussion has to focus on certain aspects or features at the exclusion of a near limitless number of others. And C.S. Lewis once made the observation that in looking back at ancient fights, he was always amazed at, that usually the people are fighting over one particular thing, and he's
mhm.
amazed at how much the combatants had in common. And I think that's almost necessary. you
Mm,
you don't really fight with a rival that isn't on the same page as you.
mm,
Either you just attack out of sheer fear, or you completely ignore because it's just not germane. You can summon up some Wittgenstein and notice that um, we don't talk to tigers, um,
mm,
because, well, not just whether or not we understand their language or they understand ours, but in a sense, we're living in a very different world. Now, to the degree that our worlds
mm,
touch, then we will engage. But the the razorback, or the gorillas in the jungle are not worried about their existence.
mm,
We
mm.
are. So
Mm,
we live in very different worlds, but what that means is that we human beings are the most inevitable cultural appropriators by far of any other
mm,
creature on the planet. And
mm,
that's our adaptability, and it's also a blindness that we just will pick up stuff much
mm.
more than crows or chimps.
Interpersonally, I've heard it said that you will never be as hurt by somebody as by somebody who you've loved,
That's right.
um, and and maybe that's part of it as well. That people who are similar to us, we sort of we feel the sting if they are not in our group, in our tribe, that they're so similar to us. How can they not? If you were killed by a tiger, you would you would not take it so personally. You'd think,
Right. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. StreamYard.
yeah, the internet
Oh,
glitched. Hello.
yep. I'm back. No, I
Well,
think that's
if
right. Well, you might have said more, but I agreed with what you said,
the
which
bit,
was,
yes,
and
the
it's the reason marriage works and doesn't,
huh.
because
Mm,
I've been married to my wife now. Let's get this right. Odd numbered years, so we're going on 37 years. I've been married to my wife, and at one level, we know each other better than we know any other person on the planet. And
mm.
on a daily basis, we are completely mystified by the other. And you would and so that just exposes this sort of this flat assumption
Yeah,
about
right.
understanding.
Yeah. Wow. I also wonder if that must make the sting worse, um, to God, of how humanity turned our back on Him. That we are in His image, are His beloved. There's all the language in the Old Testament, and I suppose the people of Israel as well, the chosen people who He had a particular relationship, when they abandoned Him and Jesus's disciples turned away from Him. It's like the
Yeah. Yeah.
the story of humanity is just one betrayal to a perfect partner after another, and then the ultimate turning the other cheek, and forgiveness when we're given the fresh start to renew things with God.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, although it's interesting because although the Old Testament, of course, uses marriage metaphors and parental metaphors, um, I think it's probably more tips more towards the parental metaphor of a child betraying the parent, because it's not a symmetrical relationship in the way that it
Mm,
is with a husband and a wife, especially in our culture. Um, Even though obviously the Old Testament prophets major in illustrations of spousal betrayal.
mm. Good. Well, let's do battle.
Oh,
Here we go. A bit of calculations going on here. The tension, can you feel it?
I don't know. Is it AI grading us, or are you grading us?
Well, that is a deep mystery that I'm not prepared to reveal. Victory, you have succeeded. So that means we can go back to the map and you can carry on with your quest.
Oh, let's go deeper.
Great. So you've got 30 gold now in your pouch.
Oh,
You can continue on to Benevolence Bay. You can carry on to the West Crossroads. So that's either questions around expression or storytelling, or you could
mm.
head straight back to Lambda's Landing and bank your gold. Um, but yes, I suggest you carry on at this point.
Oh, let's definitely carry on. We've just gotten started.
So expression or storytelling. Oh,
Let's do
sorry,
expression.
it's not showing you the options. That's because you haven't. Let me move my little character across. Yes, expression.
Oh,
Okay, great.
sure.
Benevolence Bay. So you're traveling to Benevolence Bay. Every chance that some new ghoul or creature is lurking Oh, it's not the moon howler again. Let's have the war leader. By the way, Poe, who I think you have had on your channel.
Oh yeah, yeah.
She drew the illustrations for me for
Oh,
this.
fun.
Yeah, she's done a great job.
Yeah.
Um,
She's a delightful person.
she's amazing. You know, I'm actually the godfather to her daughters, which is
Really?
a great honor. Yeah,
Wonderful. Oh,
yeah.
that's tremendous.
The barbarian commander bellows a war cry that echoes across the battlefield, their massive frame tested by decades of combat. So, the question is, I know the war leader is now going to ask you a philosophical question. I don't understand it really.
They're the most dangerous kind.
Yes. Can art be objectively evaluated?
Oh, boy. Well, anybody who knows me knows I have issue with this word objective, so I'm going to play around with it.
Sure.
Is there a possibility of hierarchy of value with art? And for that, I would say yes. Objective imagines a world I don't think we have access to. You cannot see the art as it is because we do not have eyes that can see things as they are in some monarchical godlike vision. But I think there are hierarchies of value that art clearly participates in, and I think we see the tells of that and the evidence of that in the fact that people in fact do relate to art in hierarchical ways, even if people disagree with a film or a painting or a poem or a novel. Hierarchies clearly develop around them. Now, over time, those hierarchies get even more and more complex, which is why classics, for example, endure. Nassim Taleb talks about what he calls the Lindy effect, where certain things last and endure, and there should be a reason for their endurance. So I would say that art values around art are not arbitrary, that in fact there is some sort of logos at work in the universe. And, John Vervaeke tends to be promoting sort of a Neoplatonic vision where, there would be imaginatively varying degrees of logos in any given thing, which could be one sort of metaphorical or imagistic model to play with. So I think art can be evaluated in terms of hierarchy. And I think that hierarchy is something that spans not only a contemporary human population, but also historical human populations.
Could you take an artistic expression and its context, so the meaning of the artistic work to the people looking at it, and all of the layers of symbolic meaning that are intended by the artist or are interpreted by its viewers, and say that was a success or that didn't achieve what it was hoping to achieve? So not so much that it's objective, like you could drop it to a sort of a space alien and they'd receive it with no context and understand it, but at least that it participates in the conversation of its time.
Well, I would argue that the Bible is a tremendous example of this. People don't usually think of the Bible as art, but there's tremendous literary art in the Bible. In my men's group right now, we're reading First Samuel, and the book of Samuel is one of my favorite books in the Bible.
I love both.
The artistic quality of that book is just off the chart. And Tom Holland makes this reference about the Gospels. The Gospels, none of which are written by Jesus of Nazareth himself, but the Gospels all have this enduring quality that they continue to move us and shape us and colonize us. And so I'm not going to say that that's arbitrary at all. I think it's because there's truth in it. Now, truth isn't just sort of a correspondent thing like here is a water bottle. Oh, that's a truth. But the truth is a much deeper, richer, fuller thing than just corresponding tags and facts. So, yes, I think the artistic qualities are evident and remain evident through time to a wide variety of cultures. We are reading the stories of Jesus and the story of David in a very different cultural context in which they were first produced and written. Yet we continue to find them compelling. And what's amazing is that populations from all over the world have read these same pieces, even in translation, and continue to find them compelling. And so that's why, while I want to put an asterisk by objective, I think yes, there is a value to art that transcends human cultures and customs and even contexts.
It makes me think of Isaiah 55. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. As the rain and the snow comes down from heaven, and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. And you've got to think that God is sometimes saying something that has a purpose immediately, but also has a purpose 1,000 years later, and 2,000 years and 3,000 years later as well.
This has been a struggle for biblical interpretation because, postmodernity highlighted an indeterminacy with respect to text and meaning, but and so then often there's sort of an attempt to sort of nail things down in terms of authorial intent. The New Testament doesn't assume that about Old Testament writers. That and that's an argument for divine inspiration of Scripture. That although the Bible, there are many, many authors in the Bible, there's a tremendous amount of diversity within the Bible. Christians have long believed that there is a sort of a meta author or an inspirational author to the work, even though it's all written in the words of many people and in a whole variety of cultures, quite frankly, most of which we know very little about. Most of the Old Testament is we don't know who wrote it. There's ongoing discussion about when and where or why, but yet it still shines.
Can I get a question about exegesis? So, to what degree does the Bible sit as a text that you could have on a desert island without access to any historical research, and you can just read it? Maybe the Holy Spirit helps you understand it. Versus actually, we need the scholarship, we need the additional cultural understanding. Obviously, there's lots of people putting lots of work into making sure that we have as much chance of understanding the Bible as possible. But also there have been many generations of Christians who haven't had access to that. So is it to what degree is it necessary to be able to say, oh, the real meaning of this text relies on this bit of archaeology that we only did 100 years ago?
My answer to that is usually sort of a both and. I have been in Bible studies, church meetings, different contexts where people who are uneducated apart from the Bible,
Hmm.
display amazing wisdom. At
Hmm.
times, perhaps even reading something that a biblical scholar would say, well, that's technically wrong. But
Hmm.
part of what happens, I think, with the library that the Bible is, there's sort of a self-referential aspect that
Hmm.
even if the reader might get, let's say, an outside reference wrong, one of my favorite examples is in the King James Version. Um, you have the text that says, "In my Father's house there are many mansions." Now,
Hmm.
it doesn't take a lot of understanding, but just a little bit to know that the Old
Jesus.
English, a manse was something different from a something different from Versailles. Yet
Jesus
people
wasn't
have,
imagining golf courses and helicopter pads and
well, who knows? But it's it's at the same point, this misreading of that on a technical sense doesn't necessarily violate a larger understanding of
Hmm.
the message that Jesus was giving.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm not, so when I do a Bible study, I usually try to go lightly with this kind of thing, because what I don't want
Sure.
to do is discourage people from
Well, right.
continuing to read imaginatively, even though every now and
Yeah.
then there might be a reason to say, "Mm,"
Yeah.
but that's a
Yeah.
but that's a pastoral call.
But a useful reminder. I think it's important for people teaching from the Bible that if you spend all your time talking about, well, this is actually what the Greek means, and all these kind of interesting gotchas, you are actually teaching people not to open their Bible without somebody like watching over your shoulder and making sure you don't go off the rails,
Yep.
which is a really unhelpful thing to do.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, it can be really engaging and exciting. Like
Yes.
I love that kind of stuff. But there's I know somebody who is an incredible New Testament scholar and says that they've got a rule that they just never reference any Greek or Hebrew in a sermon for exactly this reason. I think that's quite wise. All right. Well, shall we see if you've defeated the war leader?
Absolutely.
Okay. Battle with the war leader commences. Here we go. The GPU spins up as it calculates. Victory!
All right.
Well done. All right, back to the map. Good. So I think that means that you have reached Benevolence Bay, and
Oh,
you've got two more possible paths from here, unless you want to go back and get that 97 gold safe in the treasury. So you could either go to Buried Booty for questions around music, or the Fool's Pitfall for questions to do with the visual arts.
boy, I'm feeling a little. This is very game showish. I'm feeling a little uncertain about both
It,
music and
it,
visual art. So let's
if we
let's
had an audience, they'd be saying, "Gamble, gamble." But
yeah,
you want to head back and keep it safe.
let's bank that.
Smart move. Yes. Okay, great. Let's head back to Lambda's Landing. Um, and I'll click bank. So that is now secure and can never be taken away from you.
Treasures in heaven.
Yes, exactly. There's so many deep meanings to all these mechanics. All right. Would you like to go out in? It's the same four choices.
Right. Well,
Um,
let's go. Let's check out society.
the biased bridge.
Sure.
All right. You head out towards the biased bridge. But who should encounter you on the road but Ku Sith?
Ooh.
Yeah. um, three heads on the Ku Sith apparently, but I only had limited drawings from Poe, so you have to use a little bit of imagination here. Um, three sets of jaws snap and snarl as the massive hound pads forwards, each head working in perfect, terrifying harmony.
Ooh.
Oh, okay. There's a few meaty options here. I'm going to go for, do stories reveal or create truth? You can choose which way to interpret
No, I
the question.
understand. Well, the question is, can truth be created, or is it always is it just out there? And that's
Right.
a difficult question. I'm going to I know stories reveal truth, and I know we see truth because of them. So if I have to choose, I'll have to say reveal. Yeah,
It could be an and or.
yeah, yeah. I think human beings do create truth as well, and at a very pedantic level. We do all the time. Every time I move or don't move in this room, I'm creating a near limitless number of truths about my station and my, all kinds of things about me physically, mentally, et cetera, more than I can. But I think stories, to the degree that stories are between people, they certainly reveal truth, and they reveal. I don't think we would be as fascinated in them by them as we are if they weren't revelatory. At saying that, they can also lie. So stories are powerful agentic things that we create. Stories are created.
Does the story that you tell about yourself create your identity?
They certainly participate in its ongoing creation. But there are levels of my identity that are that have been set long before I ever was, being the good Calvinist that I am. So
Well,
yeah,
okay, let's dig into that a little bit, because I'm a Calvinist as well, and therefore I believe that I was chosen before the creation of the world by God, and the outcome in that sense of the most important aspect of my life was predetermined. And I guess once people reach that point, they then take it sort of as a given, I think, that everything else in life is deterministic. But I sometimes wonder if that is an unwarranted leap. I guess we've got other verses like, before a word is even on my lips, yet you know it completely, Lord, and things like this. So there's a sense in which God clearly knows a great deal about the future. But I like to hold open the door to the idea that there are some details for which God simply, maybe less important details than our salvation, but He kind of keeps some level of randomness in the mix, as it were. I don't know why I like to think that, but maybe it's my contrarian nature that even amongst Calvinists, I like to be edgy.
I think the Bible is ardently compatibilist in that
Okay.
we our outcomes are there, but our agency remains in effect. Now, how to square that reality, I don't know that we can. But Tim Keller had a great way of talking about some of these things, because he said if we didn't have an understanding that we were quite firmly in God's hand we couldn't get out of bed in the morning. But at the same time, actually, this probably is me ruining Keller's point, but unless, if we didn't have an understanding that our agency matters, we wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. So I've never, for all of the stereotyping Calvinists as ardent determinists, I've never met any who weren't also tremendously agentic and active. And you see this even within, let's say, materialist determinists like Sam Harris. Why would Sam be so passionate about his meditation app and his attempt to debunk Christianity unless he thought that his decisions and his agency mattered? So
there is, in my experience, there is no more fervent an evangelist than a Calvinist.
Yeah.
And you would think, at least by the presentation of their critics, that the Calvinist shrugs their shoulders and says it's all predetermined, so we're going to go and study the Bible like a monk in a cave. But actually, the very people who are the least Calvinistic are the ones, the sort of mystics living off in the distance. The Calvinists are the ones rolling up their sleeves and getting in the muck and trying to bring as many people with them as they can, which I think means that they're not denying the thing that perhaps other people think that they're denying. They're not denying that our actions are real and matter, and that causation is a part of the universe, and so on and so on. Like for example, on the subject of prayer, on the one hand, clearly God has a plan and has greater wisdom than us, and he would be stupid to do something different because we asked him to. And yet I also strongly believe that when we pray, things happen that wouldn't have happened if we had not prayed.
Yeah. And I think the analogy of parents and children hold well there too. Parents have ideas about their children's welfare, and children ask, and sometimes parents change their mind. And you see, does God need to? God seems to think it's pretty important to have a conversation with Abraham before he overthrows the cities of the plain in the book of Genesis. And so
and it really seems like if Moses hadn't pled with God, he was just going to destroy the Israelites.
Yeah. So, and you've got all that, and you've got these, from the foundations of the earth, all these predestinarian passages in the New Testament, and they're all in the same book. And of course, a new atheist could come along and say, see, it's inconsistent. It's like, yeah, that's okay. I don't have a problem with it.
So, somehow I feel like, I don't know, people will be upset with me for this attitude, but if I imagine one person who does nothing but read the Bible for their whole life and just doesn't even try and harmonize passages, just believes it all, kind of lives with the apparent cognitive dissonance of pieces of it, and then somebody else who reads every scholar and tries to do the most systematic theology possible and really iron everything out, I kind of feel like the first person is on safer footing and is less likely to fall into weird philosophical beliefs. Whereas we sort of have the ability to just understand the important truths as they're presented without needing to really, like, I just can't help feeling that a lot of our non-biblical simplified theological language is causing more trouble than it's worth. That, like, if we really just stuck to quoting Bible verses, we'd have everything that we need and we'd have a lot less problems.
Well, it's interesting.
It's a provocative thing to say to you because you love all the philosophy, and so do I, really. But
it's so when you go to seminary, you
Yeah.
learn about these things called commentaries, and the wall behind me is full of them. And
Yeah,
my
right.
computer, my Kindle library and my Logos library is full of even more.
Yeah.
And you read enough of them, and
Hmm.
I still enjoy reading them because they're
Mm.
sort of like talking to someone else about a Bible
Right.
passage. But you do
Uh-huh.
see that there are communities and concerns and aspects. And
Hmm.
there was a period when a lot of the commentaries written were just of absolutely no use at all
Hmm.
to a working pastor. And
Interesting.
other commentaries are, they're a huge resource because you've got to work on this passage, and you're just, you're just slogging along, and someone comes along and just opens up the passage or the book to you, and you can see new vistas. So it's not unlike just talking with people. Some people can deaden it, and some people can enliven it. And but that deadening and enlivening is always part of the broader cultural
Hmm.
currents that are going through too, and the concerns of the day. I've got commentaries that are filled with excerpts from church fathers on particular Bible passages. I find them fascinating
Hmm.
because, again, the concerns are of their day. And it isn't to say that sometimes they don't say something and a light goes on and it's really helpful. But other times I can slog through a lot of church father commentaries on biblical passages, and it's like, yeah, these are what they were concerned about for the reasons 1800, 1600 years ago on the other side of the globe. And fair enough.
Hmm.
But
Hmm. There's I've I've sometimes been in churches where there's a funny effect where you can tell that the pastor goes to a particular set of commentaries that were written, a couple of hundred years ago, and that's really influenced their preaching. And then a lot of what they're saying is kind of shadowboxing against arguments that have already been defeated. You're like,
I really
okay,
want
we
to
all
box with
agree.
16th century Catholics,
Right? Yeah, exactly.
let's not build that Vatican building, you know.
Yeah, it's like great that you're still fighting that fight. It's a bit like that, Japanese soldier who didn't realize that the Second World War had been won. But maybe part of my attitude here is kind of that is kind of that sola scriptura thing of we, you know, I've noticed a lot of our ortho bro brothers, a lot of what they reference is the early church fathers. Um, and probably my gut feeling of not wanting to rely on third parties comes from a direct debate around that issue, which also links back to our first discussion around culture, because it's kind of my very Protestant culture that leads me to this attitude about the most useful way to spend time. It's funny how these questions that we've done so far have all linked to each other.
It's almost as if you're talking to a person about them.
Wow. Great. Let's do another bout of battle, shall we?
Sure.
So this is the Kusith. Looks quite threatening. You could be in trouble here.
Uh-oh.
Victory. Whew.
Oh, good.
All right. So
Where does
we're
the
at
dog
the.
carry its gold? I wonder that.
There's a few questions about the mechanics here. Be the gold was en route, but was kind of independent of the encounter with the dog. Good. All right. So you are at the hangabout. I may have clicked the wrong road because I think you said to go to the biased bridge, but
Yeah,
you've ended
that's
up
where
at
we
the
were.
west crossroads, which explains
Oh.
why you got a question around storytelling.
Oh.
So that's a misclick. I'll
All
tell you
right.
what. I'll give you the choice. Do you want to carry on from the west crossroads? That takes you to the Charisma Chasm around tradition, the Tautology Tower to do with film, Or would you like to go to the biased bridge for a question to do with society?
Oh, let's play with film. That sounds fun.
All right. Well, that's serendipitous because you wouldn't have otherwise, if I hadn't have misclicked, you wouldn't have had the chance to go down this road. So, um, would you know it? On the route, there's a forest guardian, no less. A soft glow illuminates the mist as a unicorn approaches, each step leaving a faintly luminescent hoof print in its wake.
Wow.
Okay, let's do. Does a filmmaker have a moral responsibility? And if so, in what way?
I think a filmmaker has lots of moral responsibilities. They've got moral responsibilities towards their actors. They've got moral responsibilities in their storytelling. And, part of what I'm maybe concerned with, but maybe it's not germane, is the kind of film that gets made with let's say, an evangelistic or a propagandistic agenda. And I think there's a moral responsibility to the art itself, which means that I think filmmakers, I think they have to make good art, which means that they're revelatory, even if they're even if they take risks. For example, part of the reason the Bible is so open to criticism from people who want to read it as a rule book or um, a book of flat moralistic stories is that the Bible is nothing like that. Its heroes are all flawed. They, again, we've talked about the book of Samuel. The man after God's own heart is at times a terrible human being. And, I've seen just recently, I was looking at something where a retired pastor of a related denomination to mine, basically, just completely denies the ostensible relationship between God and David because of David's lack of moral performance in how many areas and times. I and so
Yeah.
and I see this especially with how many different attempts to make film about the Bible. And I'm so regularly disappointed in it. Not because certain kinds of filmmakers don't one way or another try to be faithful to the text, but because they're making such bad art. And if the end product of trying to derive from the Bible inspiration is such bad art, I no matter how correspondent you are to events on the screen and events on the page, overall you're probably doing a disservice to the story. So I think filmmakers have tremendous moral responsibility.
I've got my weekend retreat coming up, which I want to remind people to book onto. That's on the 11th to the 13th of July, and come along. Email me lambda.retreats@gmail.com. We are doing Ecclesiastes, and I think Ecclesiastes, it has to be acknowledged as one of the most remarkable pieces of literature ever written. And I think it's unassailable on an artistic level, whether you are a Christian or not. And there's people who read it and want to say, let's put an asterisk after everything talking about how there's no meaning under the sun, and say, uh, the point here is that with a Christian lens, as it were, under the sun refers to the world without God, but actually, of course, there is greater meaning. Like they want to edit the text and kind of water down the strength of it. I think one of the most magnificent things is that the Bible includes these passages that are kind of unfiltered, raw examinations of these deep, dark realities, these kind of truths of human life. And I've heard people who are not Christians talking about the book, and they're kind of speechless because they don't expect it. They kind of have the perception, I think, of the Bible being these twee sort of fairy tales, these very didactic, the good guy. And sometimes if you're studying the wrong bit of the Bible and you are in a, I don't know how this has become. Luke complains about sermons that he's had to sit through, but you sometimes, if the passage lends itself where the good guy gets rewarded or the bad guy gets knocked off at the end of the passage, then it's easy for the preacher to say, and therefore we need to learn from this that we should be good people because good things will happen to us.
Yeah.
And then the next week, the sort of the brakes are slammed on, and suddenly it becomes much more thoughtful. Oh, we need to know how to grapple with these kinds of texts. And I'm like, where was this examination last week when the text leaned the other way? You were happy to take it as a kind of grim fairy tale. But the whole of the book of Ecclesiastes, more or less, except possibly the little coda at the end, is just stunning philosophical examination of life. And the reason I bring it up is because I think it's an example of Christian art done in the right way, without compromise, without becoming a twee little. A lot of the Christian movies that come out are so embarrassing and cringe, right?
Yeah.
Some of them are so cringe that it goes around the full circle and kind of becomes cool again. But
yeah. It's amazing. I think of the story of Jephthah. What do you do with Jephthah? Where you made this vow. Do you sacrifice your daughter? I mean,
right.
Is there anything as godless as that? Do you break your vow?
Yeah.
Well, and so the life is full of these terribly fraught no-win situations. And so to have them just presented to you without just sort of an easy out. And good art does that, because good art reveals truths about life and informs us. So yeah, I think filmmakers have tremendous moral responsibility, far more than YouTubers. I think that's true. Definitely true.
We're completely off the hook.
Yeah.
Nothing that we do matters in the slightest. I mean, it does occur to me, I don't know. So maybe to bring up another kind of art. So I used to make video games professionally, and there was a time when I was thinking about, well, is there a way I can use my video game? This was all around the time when our video games art was a big conversation, and I was thinking, could I make evangelistic or kind of, could I use video games as a thing that's explicitly Christian? And I racked my brain, and every time I came up with an idea, it seemed pretty lame. And yeah, I still do believe in the power of video games as an artistic medium. I've just never seen it effectively used. But maybe that's falling into the same trap as Christian filmmakers, that actually they should just make films that are powerful and not force themselves to make it a Christian film, but just trust that their underlying soul that is being sanctified will shine through, and a little bit of God will be apparent in the experience in some mysterious way. Or is that a weak get out? I don't know.
I don't know. Tolkien, look at what Tolkien did.
Mm.
He didn't, I mean, it's a deeply Christian story,
Yeah.
but non-Christians who read it don't at all get the sense that Tolkien's, backed them into a really
I know.
cringy evangelistic
Well, so
enterprise.
there is zero cringe factor for Lord of the Rings, whereas there is, I would say, a 3 out of 10 cringe factor on
Narnia?
Lion, the Witch, and the
Yeah,
Wardrobe.
yeah, 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 yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
but
Which could have been part of Tolkien's criticism of his friend. Well, Tolkien was a
okay.
pretty surly guy.
However, have more people actually come to Christ through Lewis or Tolkien? And I suspect it's Lewis.
I won't disagree. And the reason is we were renting a homeless shelter out of our church, and we had this big screen because we're a Protestant, so big screen, and I use PowerPoint slides for my sermons, and all the ortho bros and trad cats just
They've all clicked off
shudder
there.
when they hear that.
Yeah, I decided not to have any amplification or projection at my retreat, which is definitely the influence of the Catholic and Orthodox people in our community, because I likewise wouldn't have even occurred to me. I'd be like, yeah, of course we'll have all the AV. I remember when I was at sorry to just to interrupt your story, but when I invited my friends along to the carol service, I thought they'd be really impressed with all the electric guitars and so on in this old church. I thought they'd be like, oh wow, I thought Christianity was out of touch, but now I'm going to become a Christian because it's so cool. And actually, as they were leaving, they were like, well, it was quite good, but I was disappointed by the projector and the electric guitars, and I kind of I yearned for that.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
Well, anyway, so I picked a movie to show the homeless people, and it was a very meaningful, artistic movie for me. And one of the volunteers of my church was like, "Why did you pick that movie?" And so I said, "Well, what movie would you pick?" And she had like Dwayne the Rock Johnson as a tooth fairy. Like, okay, put that up. They loved it.
Really?
And they loved it. And so I've had many times in my years where I've had to step off of my highbrow soapbox and understand the fact that all of the kitschy, schmaltzy Christian art, Thomas Kincaid, Sam Butler's Precious Moments, God is Not Dead films, Fireproof.
Mm-hmm.
These things help people. And so I'm not going to shame people for their lowbrow enjoyments, because it's just true. And so fine.
God has used different people to reach different people as he needs. Every now and again, so in the city centre, there's a couple of people who wander around, with a placardboard shouting about doomsday. And the natural feeling I get is kind of embarrassment. I wish they wouldn't do that. They're kind of reinforcing stereotypes about Christianity and turning people away. But I've challenged myself on that, because I bet that there's some people for whom that actually works, and it's not something I would sanction. I wouldn't say we need to make sure that we're sending people out with placards. But God's in control of the big plan. I'm reaching people with, slightly thinky, intellectual, philosophical content, and they show up to my retreat. The same thing for you, right? People come along to the Bridges of Meaning and all this, tune in for your channel. And if that's not for them, they don't subscribe. But everybody has their own personality that they can't change. And I think we should be wishing well to our brothers who we disagree with, who are going about it in different ways.
Yeah. Keep making God is not dead in the Jesus movie. Go right ahead. You won't have trouble with me.
And the theme song of God's Not Dead is kind of a banger. So,
I've never seen it.
I've not watched the film, but I've watched the trailer and it's got stuck in my head many times. So.
We are snobs. That unicorn should impale us.
Well, let's see. Victory! Whoa! What a run! That was impressive. So I'll give you the chance to come back to the landing and deposit the gold.
All right.
Which I think, let's have a look. I need an assistant to press all these buttons on the back end for me. 181 gold at the end of the session. Very impressive. So thank you so much for joining me. I guess I'll give you the chance to plug anything to my viewers.
Nothing to plug.
Great.
If you want a good if you want a good conversation tool that helps a bunch of strangers have a meaningful, satisfying conversation, go to estuaryhub.org and you can learn a little bit about Estuary. I earn no money from it, but it's a great thing for people to do if they want to have good conversation. So I'll plug that.
Fantastic. Brilliant.